Ex-cons, what was the hardest prison habit to break after being released? I can't speak from personal experience, but I know a fella who said that the toughest prison habit for him to break after being released was the overwhelming feeling of having too many options when it came to food. He said he just wanted some good old McDonald's, but when he got there, he found himself staring at the menu for a good 20 minutes, unsure of what to order since he wasn't used to having so many choices. I was released 4 months ago and I still do this. Sometimes I even just leave if there are too many options. One of the toughest prison habits to break for some ex-cons, including myself, is the tendency to stare at sharp objects. It's not necessarily a desire to use them inappropriately, but rather a shock that they're there and readily available for use. You'd be surprised what can qualify as a sharp object. For instance, even when someone tried to hand me a knife to cut veggies, I'd be afraid to touch it. The biggest challenge for me was seeing glass, especially in bathroom mirrors. The thought of smashing it and having a big jagged weapon would cross my mind, and I'd wonder why an Italian restaurant would have such a dangerous object in their bathroom. Breaking the habit of thinking of everyday objects as weapons can be difficult. As a former inpatient at a psychiatric hospital for trauma issues during my teenage years, I recall experiencing a similar feeling. Even though I never struggled with self-harm or violent tendencies, I was often shocked by the availability of sharp objects in everyday situations. For example, when a restaurant gave me a steak knife, I thought to myself, do they not realize I could literally stab someone? Similarly, when I saw a rack of scarves for sale, I couldn't help but think, you could definitely hang yourself with that. Breaking the habit of seeing objects as potential weapons can be challenging, especially when it comes to glass, such as real mirrors in bathroom settings. I remember feeling like I could smash the mirror and have a big jagged weapon in my hand. As a foster parent, I had a teenage son who came to us from juvie, and one of the most challenging habits for him to break was the way he ate his meals. He would wolf down his food and keep his arm around his plate, eating back to the wall in a hunched position. It was like he was always afraid someone would take his food away from him. My mastiff couldn't even keep up with him. It took my wife and me about a month to show him that he didn't need to worry about anyone taking his food, and that we had plenty more for him to eat. It's interesting to note that he eventually went on to join the Marines, served for 8 years, received an honorable discharge, and is now working in corrections. It sounds like you and your wife had a really positive impact on him. I tend to eat quickly, and in public places I make sure to sit facing the entrance and keep a constant eye on my surroundings. I'm always a little skeptical when people are nice to me and wonder what their intentions are. I keep extra clothes, water, and various other items in my car just in case I need them. It's not that I'm a hoarder, it's just hard for me to get rid of things. I'm not a fan of staying away from home overnight, and I've also given up boiled eggs, started over-seasoning my food, and stopped drinking Kool-Aid. After serving 6 years in prison for a fatal car accident that I caused, I found myself constantly narrating my actions to my wife without her even asking. It started off as a habit but eventually started to annoy her after a few weeks. Breaking the habit of constantly communicating my actions has been one of the hardest things to overcome since being released from prison. What was the reason behind this habit that you developed in prison? I'm interested to know. You get used to having to tell authority figures what you're doing before you do it at all times. I don't have any personal experience with prison, but my stepdad has been in and out of prison most of his life. He used to tell us that when he got out, he found it hard to sleep because it was too quiet. He said prison was so loud and chaotic that it became a habit and he got used to it. A person I know who was in prison for a few years had to sleep with infomercials turned up loud just to fall asleep at night. I used to think he just preferred to sleep with the TV on, but now I understand why. One of the hardest habits I had to break after being released from prison was being constantly paranoid and looking over my shoulder. Even now, I never let anyone stand behind me and I always turn my head to see what people are doing around me, even if they're just passing by. I also tend to eat quickly and stand up when I'm eating around people, even if I'm the last one to start and the first one done. It's a tough habit to break, but I'm working on it. After being released from prison for 8 years, I still eat like a dog. In prison, you only have 30 minutes for your meal, and that includes waiting in line and finding a seat. By the time you actually get to eat, you're already getting yelled at by a correctional officer to hurry up. It's frustrating to go out to eat with people and finish your meal quickly, only to sit there and watch others eat for another 20 minutes. That sounds like a tough situation. I can imagine how it would be difficult to enjoy your meal with so little time to eat. It reminds me of a job I had where the employee lunchroom was far away from the cafeteria, and we only had a few minutes to eat after walking all that distance. I know a few guys who spent time in prison and now, even after being out for 5 minutes 10 years, they still eat like they're in a rush. They wrap their arms around their plates and shovel food in their mouths as fast as they can. They're also really protective of their food. I remember jokingly grabbing a chip off one of their plates and he got super defensive and demanded it back. It kind of freaked me out at the time. I can only imagine the reaction of those guys on a date with someone who tries to take a bite from their plate without permission. They'd probably still have the habit of guarding their food and eating quickly from their time in prison. I knew someone who struggled with breaking the habit of watching news and daytime television, even though there were better options available to him like podcasts. He also developed a liking for AM radio, which was surprising because he knew it wasn't the best quality. He ended up taking his own life just 3 years after being released and only a year after being sentenced to 20 years. How in the world did he get a 20-year sentence? At the age of 18, my friend was sentenced to a little over a year in prison for drug-related charges. After his release, he violated his parole and was caught with large quantities of marijuana and involved in other criminal activities such as breaking into homes and petty theft. This would have resulted in at least a 15-year sentence if he were caught. He was given a chance to stay at home for a while, but he shot himself in the head with a 9mm pistol. He survived the initial shot but succumbed to his injuries 2 days later in the hospital. It was devastating for me as he was my childhood friend, and we had grown up together since elementary school. Despite being at the top of our graduating class in high school, he fell into the wrong company, leading to his death. Thanks for watching.